Welcome, everyone. I'm Levi Landis, the Executive Director of GoggleWorks Center for the Arts. I want to thank you for joining us today, our participants here on Zoom, as well as everyone able to participate on our live stream on Facebook. Welcome to GoggleWorks Center for the Arts. We think a lot about place at GoggleWorks because we meet in a former Goggle factory, and we think a lot about history, but to think about the history of the place where we operate, we want to go back a little further and acknowledge the Lenape tribe on whose indigenous grounds GoggleWorks operates. We, again, think a lot about history in the metaphor of what GoggleWorks is, where manufacturing left an area, there was a vessel and a void. And so our story continues, what the arts can do in Reading, in downtown Reading, to serve our residents there and many visitors, up to 250,000 visitors a year, but also how we can, transform lives through unique interactions with art. And that is our mission. So this is a fitting project following Esherick, someone who transformed a field, the field of fine craft, through the studio art movement and all of the influences since then. So it's really special to be able to tell the ongoing story of craft, but also to have it impact our community in Reading and now through the online means to others throughout the world. Esherick, as we learned from our first symposium, lived quite a life, and his legacy was more than just his work. It really is the story of his values, his commitment to family and friends and beauty and nature. We learned a lot from that, but we can also take quite a bit from his dynamic work, material, his application of technique to materials, and the multidisciplinary approach he took over the course of his life. I can't thank enough the artists that are joining us here. I will save my breath because I know Tim's going to give you an introduction and thank you in a little more deep way. But suffice it to say, you bring this exhibition to life. The best way to view the Wharton Esherick collection is in the studio that is now the Wharton Esherick Museum, and we want to thank our partners there, as well as the funding that came from the John and Robin Horn Foundation to put on this symposium and to mount Following Esherick. So I will leave it there. If you want to learn more about GoggleWorks or become a member or support our charity work, which includes just a great team of which Tim is a great member, trying to touch our community, which has a lot of needs and a lot of challenges. So we're so grateful for the ongoing support from foundations like John and Robin Horn Foundation, as well as members and donors like you. So thanks so much for your time. And Tim, thank you for an incredible program, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Levi. And hello, everybody watching on Facebook. My name is Tim Compton. I'm the artistic director here at GoggleWorks, and I'll sort of be helping facilitate this discussion this evening. We have a full house of the fantastic artists that are participating in our Following Esherick exhibition. And I do want to take a moment to sort of introduce each of them individually so that you can kind of put a face and a name to the works that are going to be scrolling across the screen as well. So first off, we've got Michael Brolly. And Michael is a wood turning artist from Philadelphia, PA, whose lathe turned objects have gone on exhibit all over the world. Brolly started showing his work nationally before graduating from Kutztown University with a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1981. He's exhibited both nationally and internationally throughout his career, including solo exhibitions and major national traveling exhibitions. Brolly's work can be found in both permanent and private collections, including the Detroit Institute of Art, Yale University, LACMA Long Beach, the Center for Art and Wood, and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and has been featured in numerous books, news, articles, and magazines. Michael, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey.
Michael Puryear is a world-renowned furniture maker who combines contrasting colors and textures with a fusion of linear and curved forms, accentuating the wood's natural character, rich with references to Scandinavian and Shaker design and African culture. His pieces are permeated with shibui, a Japanese term for subtle elegance, Puryear approaches furniture making as a problem-solving practice, a fan of teaching because it gives him the opportunity to step outside the studio and be a part of the community that influences his work. Puryear has taught at Tennessee Aramount School of Arts and Crafts, North Carolina's Penland School of Craft, and Maine Center for Furniture Craftsmanship, among other learning institutions. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Michael.
You're welcome.
Jasper Brinton is a designer and woodworker living in an old schoolhouse in rural Pennsylvania. Born in 1938 in Alexandria, Egypt, of American parents and raised in the Middle East, he attended Gordonstown School in Scotland, where he received extensive training in traditional joinery from a Clydebank shipwright. After attending University of Pennsylvania, he worked for a publisher and then a filmmaker before turning to wood, his real passion. This led to a 40-year career centered around contemporary furniture and its functional design. Over the years, Brinton has received numerous commissions and recognitions from public institutions and private corporations alike. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Jasper.
You're quite welcome.
Not in attendance today, he couldn't make it, but Jack Larimore has some fantastic sculptures in the exhibition, and he is one of the few primary sculptors that's showing those types of works. It's great to see the way that those contrast against both the functional and sculptural works that Esherick has on display. Ray Kelso has been building furniture for over 40 years. Believing in quality joinery and hand-applied finishing techniques, he builds pieces to last a lifetime and to be passed down through generations. Hand-selecting the wood used in each piece that he builds, he sources materials from Pennsylvania sawmills. Working directly with a sawyer allows him to select the perfect wood for each piece. His work spans everything from single pieces of furniture to entire custom interiors. He works in his studio as at his residence in the suburbs of Philadelphia. Thanks so much for joining us, Ray.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And last but certainly not least is Amy Forsyth, is a furniture designer maker who was trained as an architect at Penn State and Princeton University. She currently teaches three-dimensional design and furniture design at Lehigh University. She's been on the board of trustees of the Furniture Society and was also on their editorial advisory board, where she worked on several publications such as Furniture Studio, The Heart of the Functional Arts, and Tradition in Contemporary Furniture. In addition to designing and building furniture, she has published numerous articles in Woodworking Magazine, American Craft, The Craft Factor, and other journals. Her work has been exhibited throughout the United States. Beyond furniture, Amy is also an accomplished musician and plays fiddle and sings with various groups throughout Lehigh Valley. Thanks for joining us tonight, Amy.
Thanks, Tim.
All right.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Michael.
Amy.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah, that's true. I will try to clarify which Michael I'm talking to tonight. That was something I was cognizant of as we kind of work through this. So to give our viewers a bit of an idea of how things are going to work this evening, I've got a slate of questions to ask all these fantastic artists. From there, they'll be able to sort of comment on the different topics related to the show and the exhibition. We've got a slideshow that'll be playing along to give you an idea of some of the works that we're talking about and some of the topics that we're discussing. We know that the topic of woodworking can become very jargon dense, so we'll work to sort of work through any of that specific information and make sure that everybody viewing in and tuning in today can learn a little bit. That's the goal of this type of a discussion, is to sort of demystify the process and give people a more clear understanding of why we all appreciate Esherick's work so much and all the amazing works that are in this show. So in addition, we'll be monitoring the Facebook chat and working in any relevant questions that our viewers provide. So without further ado, we'll kind of jump into some of these questions. And Ray Kelso, I'm going to start with you. If I remember correctly, you mentioned that the wood for the cherry burl bowls that was that are in the show was from the same wood supplier Esherick used. How important is wood sourcing to you for your work? And do you frequently start the project with a piece of wood in mind?
Yes, that is true. That particular barrel that's up there now on the screen, though, did not come from Ed Ray. That came later after Ed had passed away. But the other barrel bowl that's in the show did come from Ed. And I had picked that up when I was working for him doing a tree removal job somewhere down on the main line. Wood selection is very, very important in the whole process for my process in furniture design. What I like to do is, if I can, to source materials that are from the same tree and the same log. There is so much variation between color, grain, figure in wood that if you are doing a large piece, it's important to have that consistency in grain and particularly in color, because color can really be a glaring difference if it's not taken into account.
That's really interesting. So I'm assuming then, in thinking about the stool that you have in the exhibition, it's very clear that the ribboning on the legs of it are very vibrant and stuff. Did that also come from all one piece?
Yeah, that was actually came from a bigger job that I had done, a headboard for a gentleman down in Philadelphia, and that was leftover. It was 8-quarter material. And so the legs were all 8-quarter, and I just resawed a piece for the seat. So the seat, well, I'm sorry, no, the seat mat is walnut. The legs did come from 8-quarter curly maple that was left over from that previous job.
That's awesome. It's really beautiful. So for those that are listening in, when measuring wood, they'll typically refer to in quarters. So 8-quarter is actually about 2 inches thick of wood. So that's often how wood is referenced as far as thickness. But that's really interesting, Ray, as far as the way you make use of the different pieces. Amy, in teaching design, it often involves learning core concepts and principles. People often say that Esherick listened to the wood and brought its best features out. Do you find that some students have this gift, and how do you as the teacher cultivate and improve their work?
I'm in a funny sort of situation with my teaching. My students so far have mostly been beginners, and every now and then you get one that is just amazing, and sometimes that student is not even a major, which is really frustrating. I've had these business students that took my class as an elective, and there was one in particular I'm thinking of that I was he was just amazing. It was like I didn't even have to teach him, and those students really they teach themselves in a sense. And so my goal really in teaching is to try to find what each student, what makes each student tick, and kind of take them there further. And so the thing about wood is that a lot of these students are not that connected to the physical world. They don't make a whole lot of things, and they're really good with their thumbs and texting and working on the computers. But a lot of them are really hungry to make something beautiful and physical. And that's where I got them. You know, I'm the person that kind of, you know, shows them. I like to do a lot of hand tool work with them. And, you know, the wood teaches a lot of lessons because you can't get away with anything. It wants what it wants. You'd better understand that and work with it. And that's a big lesson for them to learn, since they're mostly computer-driven kids.
Definitely. And Michael, you mentioned teaching in your bio. So have you had experiences where it's more about sort of helping along that person that clearly has a vision and an idea?
That's very interesting. I kind of ditto Amy there in terms of the experience of students these days. But the students, the best ones I experience are students who have been in an environment where they've seen something made, even though it may be a total other material. They've absorbed some idea of that possibility, where a lot of times students who haven't had that exposure really don't know how to begin approaching, the process. And it's very interesting to me, how that dynamic works. But I agree too that a lot of students now are very interested in engaging their hands, and I think it's kind of because the use of the current technology is so limiting in terms of that, and when you start to manipulate materials, it's very exciting.
I should mention also that Michael Puryear was one of my first teachers, and I learned a lot from him.
We all have.
Yes, we have. Agreed.
That's fantastic. I love what you said there as far as a concept of the possibility. I think that people seeing somebody work with a material does give them an idea of sort of its limitations and its capabilities. And that is so critical especially for beginning students to understand, where those limits are and begin from a place. It kind of almost takes them away from the blank canvas syndrome of not knowing the endless possibilities. So I love that you kind of touched on that. That's so true.
Yeah, I think that though that it's not just seeing the material, a material. It's really just the idea that it's possible to manipulate something in the world, and that understanding can be applied to various materials. And so they've got like a head start just by having seen somebody, a lot of times it may be their father's a contractor or even a plumber, but they're seeing people changing something physically. And I think that that's kind of where, they have a head start.
Yeah,
That's great.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I find that if I get them looking over my shoulder, my job's half done, because then they're like, what is that? What are you doing? How are you doing it? So I like that when I can grab a student that way.
Definitely. That's great. Jasper, in talking to artists and visitors of the show, the value of the pieces often comes up. Price has always been a design denominator that can express value of a work, but also prohibit access to some. How did Esherick tackle this tricky topic? And how have you sought to ensure the buyer understands the value of the work that goes into making a piece?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you're including it, because if we're going to try to make a living doing all of this, you're no longer obviously a glorious amateur. You're supposed to be a professional. And that comes with obviously a lot of, it comes with a lot of issues. For instance, what you do with your work, you value personally, but unfortunately it has to be reduced to a price. So all of a sudden you're stuck with the concept that, hey, I've put 100 hours into this, but I can only charge for 10 because I wouldn't have the work if I didn't do it. So I don't know quite how to deal with this issue, except to kind of go with the flow that ultimately, and if I can relate it to how Wharton might have done it, you sort of take on a challenge. You're not going to make the full amount of money that it deserves, but you have the opportunity to work on something that you would never have been able to otherwise, because the effort kind of goes along with the rewards in a very subtle way. So I guess you could say that in the end, when you begin to get a little more, well, I don't want to use the word famous so much, but when you get some recognition, and people are willing to see, how difficult woodworking really is. It's labor intensive. It's hard work. And when they begin to appreciate that the value really has never really been appreciated throughout history, when you really get down to it, that you can say to yourself, well, damn it, I'm going to charge what it's worth, And if you're lucky enough to reach that stage, and this is probably advice I would give a young person, don't get too excited about it. Always put yourself in a place where, in a sense, you want to learn, because by learning and making mistakes, even though it's going to cost you in money, you're going to progress as an artist.
I also think that it's very important to put your work out there, to be willing. And for myself, it was a difficult thing the first time I entered a show. You know, it felt very kind of, I would say, almost dangerous, you know, to expose what you were doing. But you get, if you get feedback from that, then that's an encouragement. And I agree with Jasper that the issue of value is a difficult one. I'm finding now that the market, well, that I won't say the market, but a lot of people have some idea of a value of what they want to spend for a piece, but that value doesn't really represent a handmade piece. It's more about what the market would charge. And so it sometimes requires you to be diplomatic and educational at the same time.
Well, if I could just follow that up, I think that applies to how, you know, the part of the question to how it relates to Wharton Esherick. I think he followed this trajectory of really not making much money in the beginning at all. Well, it's not hand to mouth because he did have some income flowing in, but he had to justify what he was doing, not only on an aesthetic, in an aesthetic world, but also on the basis of, is this financially make sense, you know, to be doing this, to dedicating my life to this? There are easier ways to do it, in other words. I think once he set himself up like that, the die was cast, and he had to, in a sense, progress and get to that stage where it became worthwhile. So the question really revolves around, when do you know that it's going to work for you in the long run? That's the big if that a young person getting into this has to face. And luckily, because we had Wharton before us, we had an example. So he gave me courage in any case by just being able to have done it, you know.
Yeah, and I think that issue faces all new makers. You know, they have to find out where their work fits, how they're going to market it. But you know, at some point they have to establish or be willing to set a value that they can live with.
I think another thing that comes into play here is the imposter syndrome. You know, I don't know how many of these gentlemen and ladies that are with us today have gone through that, but I certainly have on a number of occasions. I don't think Esherick ever went through that, but referring to Esherick getting necessarily what he wanted to get for a certain piece, if I'm not mistaken, Oblivion, the large walnut sculpture of a couple embracing, was one of his favorites. And the stories that I've heard about that is that he always refused to sell it. But if somebody come in and wanted to buy it, he would always raise the price to a point that, you know, would almost to ridiculousness. Although I bet today it wouldn't be so ridiculous. But he managed to hang on to that piece. And I think from what I've heard, that was one of his favorites, and he really didn't want to sell it. I have a few of those too in my own personal collection that were pieces that I really didn't want to part with, and that's what I did too. Raise the prices, and they never sold, so I kept them, and that's fine with me, actually.
It's funny, both Michael and Ray, you just mentioned a couple of things that I try to, in my education background, really talk with students when they get to that point of putting a piece into an exhibition or sharing it with the world. You know, it's a very personal experience where they're, you know, putting their pride and joy out for people to judge. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people. But one of the things that I always try to advise them on at that stage in the game is put a price on it that you're comfortable with it walking away. If that's completely ridiculous, if that's a completely ridiculous price, at least somebody will walk away knowing how much you value that piece of art. And that starts the conversation somewhere, is that they can actually realize how valuable that piece is to someone. And that is an important part to educate the customer on as well. It might not mean that you're selling hundreds of them, but to Ray's point, if you put $1 million on something and it walks away, it shows you how much somebody else also loves that piece. And that's a really good feeling as a maker to kind of share with someone else. So it's definitely a tricky thing, but I have found that in giving students, especially young students, that advice, they're never disappointed. I've had both sides of it. Nobody ever bought it, and somebody actually bought it, and both times they were thrilled. So it's sort of a win-win in that situation. All right, we got Michael Brolly. Got to clarify that one. Your work is commonly associated with the lathe in a similar way that Esherick's is commonly associated with the bandsaw. How much does the tool and making process affect the finished piece for you, or is it simply a means to an end?
The lathe is a design tool for me. It's because you can do anything with the lathe. It's just, to me, stunning when I finally found the lathe. When I was a kid, I carved things by hand, round things that should have been made in a lathe because I didn't know what a lathe was. So once I found a lathe, it was like, oh, but like to get directly to your thing, my work has taken on shapes that I know I can accomplish easily, like the eyes on that frog that's up there now. Carving around that by hand is really slow. So like I try to design things where I can get a lot of the work done, like on a lathe or with some machine, I know what it does, so that when I get down to the fine details, I haven't lost interest in the piece. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, that's it's really interesting.
Yeah, because but the
lathe
lathe
lost
is
interest in the piece because there's a pace to making.
Someone else was talking. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just jumping off of what you had said, but I was more fascinated by what you were saying about making squares and triangles on a lathe.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's fun to do too.
That's awesome. So there's been several discussions with visitors to the show about finishes and surfaces. There's a wide array of different finishes and surfaces. And artists have always been a little bit proprietary about their finishes. But Michael and Jasper, when we were picking up the work from you guys, you were discussing some of your different finishes that you were using on your works. What do you look for in a finish, and how can that change the piece for you? And Michael Puryear, I'll start with you on that one.
I don't know that it changes the piece per se. I'm looking for a finish that lets the wood show itself. So I'm not looking for a high polish finish. I want something that you can actually identify, the wood, although a little bit of shine doesn't hurt. And I found that when I started, I was jumping around with different finishes. And I realized that it's better to spend time with various finishes that you find satisfying, and kind of maybe every once in a while try a new finish, because the finish can make or break a piece. I just recently did a piece where I was doing a filled grain, and I had been doing that with solvent-based finishes. And then this one, I was thinking, oh, I'll just start it with acrylic finishes, and you couldn't do it. It just wouldn't work, So, and so I had to strip the piece and go back to what I knew.
Really interesting. And Jasper, I know you had a couple of different recipes that you were discussing and things like that. What do you look for in a finish?
Oh, no, I've worked in the industrial sector, and I've come across practically every finish you can name. So when it comes to my own work, I try to do as little as possible because I really am not that interested in the finishes, to be honest. So the wood can kind of do its own thing in so many ways. So I tend to put as little effort into it and use either wax or use some kind of oil sealer just to keep dirt off of it. But ultimately my work is kind of irresponsible in that sense because I've left a lot of it unprotected as far as the owner's maintenance schedule is concerned. I mean, I don't use polyurethanes or any of these fancy finishes that are out there, but I know how to use them, you know. Yeah, that's about it.
Sure. Ray, I know Esherick used exotic woods in some of his works, but heard he had shifted primarily to local woods later on in his life. Why do people use exotic woods, and what are some of the benefits of working with more local woods?
I have no idea why people use exotic woods, to be honest. I've never used them. Esherick, I believe, once made the comment that he should be able to build something beautiful from what grows in his backyard. And being self-taught and having a relationship with Ed Ray, Esherick's lumber supplier, I never saw a need for me to go outside of what I could get in my own backyard. It's much easier for me to source woods locally. I can think of 3 sawmills within 7 miles of me that all sell Pennsylvania hardwoods, all locally sourced. Most of them come from what they call the Great Forests of the Main Line, which are, Main Line is a suburban area outside of Philadelphia that included large estates and which were very rarely logged. And Ed Ray got a lot of his material down there, and some of the local sawmills do as well. If I want to get exotic woods, I would have to drive 30 miles to Delaware County or somewhere like to Groff and Groff or Rick Hearn or one of the other bigger lumber suppliers. The other thing I like locally sourced woods is that I can go to these sawmills. I have a personal relationship with them. I can look through their piles. They know what I'm looking for. So if they get something unusual too, they'll give me a call and say, hey, this just came in. And a perfect example of that was a local sawmill who this guy found a large 4-foot diameter curly sweet cherry, which is pretty rare. It's rare to find a sweet cherry that's that big. They usually go hollow, but this thing was full of curl from heart to center. And he called me up and said, hey, it's here. And so I ended up buying a good deal of that from him. So that you can't do. And the work that I do, a lot of the large pieces that I do, I can get, as I've said earlier, I can get pieces from the same tree. So the color is consistent and figure is consistent. And that's very important to me. So I don't use exotic woods. I can certainly understand why people might want to use them. But for me, price is a factor as well. I can buy, locally sourced woods at reasonable prices.
I do use some exotic woods, and I kind of use woods more as a palette, for the variety of colors or textures that are available in it. Because oftentimes I'm using 2 different species in a piece. And so I'm kind of looking for a conversation between the 2. So, but I don't always use exotic woods. And, I use them very economically. I don't, cut them up or, in some ways, I think that makers, like studio furniture makers say, aren't really the problem in terms of exotic woods. It's when industry decides that, that this species is going to be the latest thing. And so then that puts a tremendous pressure on the source. I remember when I went to a hotel one time and all these headboards were made out of wangi. And it's, they're just, plywood, and you just kind of say, well, yeah, this is a waste of that wood.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I had a lesson fairly early about this. I saw a mirror that Daniel Jackson had made, and he had used, I don't know, probably 8 different exotic woods of every color. One purple heart and yellow heart and let's see, I don't know, a bloodwood. I mean, it had, there were, and I saw a photograph of it before, and I was looking at it 20 years later, and it was all brown. And, and I thought, oh, well, if you want something to be colorful, you can't rely on the color of the exotic wood. You're going to have to paint it. So I use a lot of milk paint for that reason, if I want something to be colorful.
It's interesting.
Yeah, the bench that I have in the show that I did for the Esherick show, it's the wood is it's called tulip poplar, but it used to be called yellow poplar.
Mm-hmm.
And my original idea was that I was going to dye it yellow. No, I think I was going to paint it. I was going to use milk paint, you know. But actually, those boards were so beautiful in terms of heartwood and sapwood, and so linear that I just, you know, used aniline dye to kind of accentuate the yellow.
There's your answer, Amy.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, how did he get it to be that yellow? There you go, because it looks really natural.
It's all in the name.
Yes,
Oh,
when you're working mulberry or Osage orange, the wood is such a delicious yellow that if only you could keep it.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, Michael, you brought up the chess bench, which is one of the pieces in the show. And while we're on this chess set that's on the screen, you also drew a connection to the Esherick chess set with your chess bench. And I find it interesting that chess set blends the straight line techniques of traditional woodworking and the sculptural techniques in the pieces. How do you approach a set like that? And what are some of the pieces you try to incorporate to help all the different pieces sort of work together and flow together?
Yeah, that was a commission. It was a client whose kids were really into chess, and they wanted somewhere where they could play and leave the game going. Most of the time when I was a kid and you were playing a board game, you know, you either had to clear it up or get it out of the way. So, but the only brief there was that they wanted to use some reclaimed wood. And so the rails on the bench are actually reclaimed oak. And I kind of accentuated the age because they'd actually been milled recently, but you know, I added some color to kind of bring them into looking aged. There's also was a show recently at the, oh gosh, I'm blanking the name, the Osamu Noguchi show at the Osamu Noguchi Museum that a friend of mine curated, and it was about artist-made chess sets. And that kind of influenced me in terms of what the shapes could be. You know, I mean, there's and Esherick's piece too. I mean, I'd seen that, and I'd seen oh, what's his name? He did the Nude Descending the Staircase.
Duchamp.
Yeah.
Marcel Duchamp.
Huh?
Marcel Duchamp. He was a chess player.
Yes, Marcel Duchamp. Yeah, he had an amazing chess set and was a consummate chess player.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that was all there ahead of me. And, you know, I just basically, you know, kind of went with it. And I wanted the pieces to be, you know, kind of just basic, essential forms, but recognizable at the same time. It was also important to make the queen taller than the king. That was
little subliminal messages in there.
right.
That's nice. I wanted to talk a little bit about the music stand. We have a sort of a corner of sort of music and presentation pieces. And Jasper, in the documentary, you talk about Esherick's music stand sort of embodying music. And Amy, as a musician, making work to be used in the playing process, how do you work to encompass the energy and potential in a work designed for performance. And then Jasper, I wanted to kind of give you the chance to follow up after that in talking about the music stand. But first, Amy, especially with your fantastic piece, the music table there.
Well, I have to say that the table is not for performance, but actually for jam. So I host jams at my house all the time, and I have musicians come and we all sit around the table, and when they need to get up and get a beer or something, you can put the instrument stands down to hold the instrument. And that was really the intention behind this piece. I took a picture of my table with Esherick's gorgeous music stand in front of it, and I posted it on Facebook, and everybody went gaga over the music stand. I'm like, and they're like, "Oh, is that your music stand?" I'm like, "Oh, I wish I could take credit for it, but no, mine's the one in the back." But I was actually when I did mine, I was also looking at the legs, kind of referring to violin scrolls, and I built those little kind of those stands repeatedly to kind of get it really right. It doesn't work for guitars because the center of gravity is too low, but it works for banjos, mandolins, and violins quite well. But again, it's really not intended for performance, but really just as a group thing. But it turned out to be a much more polished piece than I had thought about when I first started to make it, because a jam can be a real messy thing. People tip over beer and they kick things, and they're just kind of in the middle of making music. And so to me, the Esherick music stand is much more, it's much more elegant, and it's something that you would put on stage with you if you were performing a piece, and it would add to the beauty of that. So I think I'm going to have to take this on as another challenge one of these times. Because
it's funny you mentioned that, but like there is also the dual music stands that Esherick did that
yes,
do have sort of that
too.
interactive dynamic and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah,
but Jasper, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, but that is another thing that you could very well see using in a performance. I mean, I could see Bach double violin concerto happening from that stand. It would be perfect.
Absolutely. So Jasper, you talk a little bit in the documentary about the music stand and sort of how wonderful it is with the lines and the energy and that kind of stuff. In looking at sort of encapsulating everything that is a music performance, what really sticks out to you about this music stand, and how it sort of embodies all of that?
Well, it's one of the most important pieces that Wharton ever created, in my opinion. I don't think he arrived at it spontaneously. There were a few antecedents. He had to build up to this one. There's some trial runs, in other words. But what it does from a formal point of view, and this is of course debatable, is essentially how it both expresses a linear way of imagining form, but also a three-dimensional way of encompassing form. And you could say, well, how does it become three-dimensional when it looks so two-dimensional in so many ways? The only way I can describe this is to perhaps use another illustration. Supposing you had a table, it has 4 legs. Well, the table is also supporting the space above it, and it's encompassing the space below it. So the table is also space in some sense. In other words, it's part of a whole, a conceptual whole. So the music stand does this for me too. It takes command of itself, but it also takes command of the space that it's in. And as such, if you were to use the metaphor that it is music, which of course you could or couldn't do, depending on the poetry within you, it would certainly energize the musician to start playing something, in my opinion.
Definitely. And Michael, I want to pull you into this conversation real quickly, because you also have the lectern that's in the exhibition as well. And I know that that's part of a larger space around it. So In the case of the lectern, how is that intended to sort of interact with the space and maybe energize it in a way?
Yeah, because it's for an altar, right? So it's a religious lectern. And I made a folding altar, which is kind of like a infinity sign. And trying to lift the book and the spirit of what's in the book up off the floor and give it, gravitas or whatever. That's what I was aiming for, like that, the magic of the religious experience kind of deal. But there's an interesting thing about that. A critic was saying that I could make a lectern look like it's kneeling, and to me that's not really kneeling. So the chair that goes with that is kneeling. It's got the bent forms, and it's real. It's a shame I don't have a picture of that to show people, but that challenge of trying, okay, wait a minute, I can make something kneel. And it was all because of that uplifting form of that lectern. You don't have an image of it, I gather, to put up.
No, unfortunately, I didn't grab that one this evening, but it is interesting you highlight sort of almost the human-like qualities of it, because I feel like the music stand is very much standing up and sort of presenting in that way as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's such a lyrical piece too. I mean, it's the energy flow from the ground up, and the actual stand that holds the music kind of reflects the music staff in a way. Mm-hmm. It's been a piece that's really challenged a lot of makers. I mean, quite a few makers have tried to do something as elegant as that, and I don't think of any that have succeeded.
It's a funny one too, though, because it kind of bugs me that the legs come bashing into the place where the music rests, and yet it's not as it feels like it should be kind of truncated there, and yet it doesn't read that way. Like I keep wanting that back leg to kind of keep swooshing up the way that the front two do. But it's not as jarring as you would think it should be, considering what's happening there. I don't understand it.
I hear a challenge.
Definitely. All right, Ray, woodworkers have marveled at the joinery in Esherick's work. Even after looking at some of your pieces for a month, I can't figure out how they were assembled. So beyond strength over time, what do you consider when selecting joints for your work? And I am well aware that this could end up being, an entire evening conversation about joints and the details in woodworking.
Yeah, well, to me, there are only two joints in woodworking: mortise and tenons and dovetails. Anything beyond that, I'm not sure. I guess they call it a maloof joint that's in the stool that I did. That's another one that I use quite a bit. But they're the two primary ones that I use. And contrary to popular belief, my opinion, the mortise and tenon joint is a much harder joint to cut well than dovetails. Just a personal opinion, but I after cutting several thousands of dovetails, they come secondhand sort of, but I'm not there yet with mortise and tenons, even now.
This is my favorite Esherick piece.
Mine too, Amy.
Is it? I can tell that, because you know what, you did what he did here. Like, I'm always astonished at the fact that he started with four facets on the bottom, and then as he spun it, every time a stair flew off, he lost the facet until he got to the top, and there's only two at the top. And you did that too in yours. I was like, oh my God, look at that. He loves this piece.
Well, I did a presentation with the Furniture Society through the Esherick Museum Tuesday of last week, and I made the comment that this my library ladder came up in the discussion. I made the comment that I stole two design ideas from Esherick with this one, and the outside shape, the structure from my library ladder actually came from and was inspired by Esherick's library ladder that's in the Philadelphia Museum of Art that was a part of the Curtis Bach estate. So I managed to swipe 2 good ideas from him on that one.
Nice. But I always, I take my students to the Esherick Museum every semester, and this, it's so wonderful to have this there because the docent tips it over and I show them everything that's going on underneath, and they always come out of there just like their minds are blown. It's such a fantastic experience for them.
Well,
Yeah, in terms of choosing joinery, you know, because I look at work as problem solving, I'm always looking for what's the appropriate joint to solve that problem. And, you know, Ray is kind of right that there really aren't a lot of joints that really are very structural. I mean, nowadays we've got the biscuit and the, you know, all sorts of other things, but they wouldn't stand up in a piece like this. You know, I mean, these pieces have to be engineered and be able to take the weight of a human body, and as well as the energy of stepping up on it. And so they have to be pretty strong.
definitely. So Michael Brolly, in so many of Esherick works and other exhibited works in this show, the function of the piece is almost disguised within sort of the finished look of the form. The pieces sort of serve 2 very different roles in that they're beautiful to look at, and then there's sort of a functional component sort of hidden within it that you can also engage with. Your amazing creature in the show is a great example of this. When designing a piece that balances form and function, how do you try to strike that balance, and what are some of the key decisions that you try to make in executing that?
My teacher taught me to design the piece first, and then after that, figure out how to make it. So I kind of live by that. So like with this piece, I had done a male self-portrait, not the one that's in the show, but a different one. And I got a lot of grief. And so especially from women. So I thought, okay, I'll make a woman and she has more space. But you're right. People just don't realize that's a jewelry box. They don't realize that it opens. They don't realize that it turns. They don't realize there's a thing in its head. And I love that because it's just that. And that was from Esherick. Like when I went to his place, I took a course in wood to try to make things square and flat. And then while I was learning that, because I never had machines when I was young, I went to Esherick's museum and he bragged about no right angles. So all that went out the window, and that, blame him.
Well, I would say blame him for effective design more than anything. Like, it's really neat to see that.
He just totally set me free. And then like the whole thing about joinery and all that, like I like making something like that piece and making it all work. Like to me, the magic of something that's going to last through the ages and look as crazy as that is magic to me.
Yeah.
Keeps me
Well,
going.
and Jasper, your desk is in this because it's been one of the other sort of aha moments that as I'm taking people around, I've gotten to do a number of the tours of the show for people. And nobody knows that there are drawers in that desk. They just think it's, you know, a solid slab of wood, and then it's got 2 legs. And then the second I put on a glove and sort of pop open that drawer, they just like, whoa, it's almost as shocked as with the Brolly piece. And I do think that is something that Esherick does in a number of his different works. Was it sort of a finished design that you were looking for and then you worked in the drawers, or was that, how did you balance that in this piece?
I'm not sure right off the top of my head, but those were the days when Wendell Castle was stacking wood and carving it, and you know, that whole trip. And I thought, well, damn it, I better try it too, you know. So somebody asked me for a desk and I thought, now's my chance. And I figured out a way of assembling all of that wood. The top actually is curved and made of pieces that, when it's clamped up, assumes a curve like the deck of a boat. And I thought, wow, that's a good challenge. Let's do that. And then when it came to putting the drawers in, I realized that the contraction and expansion of this whole desk would make it impossible to have drawer runners in there. So I almost gave up on the job until I figured out that if I didn't have those runners fixed, if they could float freely, the desk could expand and contract around them and the drawers could still work. So I worked up a system where I could do that. And after a lot of trial and error, I think it might have worked, because I haven't had a callback on it yet. Although this is the #2 version that I gave to my wife.
Nice. And I saw Michael Puryear, your brain was understanding and all the creative problem solving that went into that. I could see you processing it as he was going along. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Amy has it right. I mean, you, what did she say? You teach yourself, you know? And if you don't keep doing that all through your life, yeah, you got to keep some excitement going.
That's what makes it interesting, really, is those solving those kind of problems that, that almost you present to yourself, really, in some ways, just because this idea has gotten into your head.
Right.
Well, Jasper, as you detailed in the documentary showing with the exhibition right now, you've met Esherick and walked through his house with him. Being such a prolific maker and designer, how did he approach his making? Was it with like enthusiasm and vigor? Was it sort of calmly confident? And how did that mirror or contrast with the way that you were working with wood at the time?
I don't really know how to answer that question, because I was invited to go see him by an architect who, in a sense, had been friends of his, and so I think Wharton, when he saw the chair that I brought for him to look at, thought, well, I better help this poor guy on, because the chair was commissioned by an architect who wanted a stacking chair, and I worked on it for 2 or 3 months, and I couldn't get the stacking part to work. So I basically failed at it. But Wharton sat in the chair and we had this talk, and he said, come see the studio. So he gave me this wonderful tour, and down in the bottom where all the wood chips were piled up, there was a kind of path dragged through there where he had shuffled along. It was quite inspiring. It was my first real encounter with him, so I didn't quite know what to think. I didn't have any questions. We didn't talk, but he took me to the bedroom. Really, he invited me into his life, at that moment, now that I think about it. And then we went to see the Kahn workshop, and I met Horace Hartshaw. So he obviously, thought, well, why not? And in answer to how did he go about, in a sense, I don't quite know. I don't quite know if he did have any other. How should I put this? No, I don't think I can answer that question. I'll just leave it at that.
That's a truly unique approach then, perhaps.
Maybe, yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, we'll finish up with one sort of last question here. And really, this is one that kind of goes out to all of you, and maybe we take turns talking about it or something. But if someone was inspired by the show and the work that you have in it to take up woodworking, what would you wish someone would have told you when you first started? So we'll kind of finish with that, and we'll just kind of go around here. I got Michael Puryear, then Jasper, Ray, Michael, Brolly, and Amy. So we'll kind of start with you, Michael Puryear.
I don't know that I could answer that question. What drew me to it was just forms and the technology and the fact that, you know, I was able to see these ideas in 3D that, you know, I mean, I started out as a photographer and I was looking at my work and I was realizing what was important was the forms, not so much the details of what, you know, may be included. And that's really been a driver for me, you know, is form. So yeah, that's my answer.
Jasper, what do you wish someone would have told you when you first started?
I'm really pleased that nobody said anything to me, put it that way. So I'm going to follow that my advice. I think well, specifically woodworking is a really tough road to begin with, and in many ways I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I certainly didn't wish it on my son. So there you go.
There you go. How about you, Ray? What do you wish somebody would have said?
Learn to draw.
Oh.
One of the interesting things that I see often at the Esherick Museum are his wood blocks and also some of his pencil drawings. There's one in particular pencil drawing that there's a drawing of his spiral staircase. And it's this, I mean, if you look at that staircase, he drew it using maybe 3 or 4 lines, and his economy of line and how he was able to portray an idea and a shape and a form so simply. Now I can draw sort of, I can get by, and I was trained as a civil engineer, so I have mechanical drawing, I can do that. But that's not the same as sketching. And so that would be my advice, learn to draw.
Good advice. I feel like I'm telling students that all the time, is that that's where you can
Excellent
start.
advice.
Yeah. Michael Brolly, what would you wish somebody would have told you?
I'm stealing this line from somebody else, but I heard a guy one time say, sanding is a labor of love. You gotta love it because it's a lot of work.
That is very true. Very true. And Amy, I'll give you the final word here tonight. What would you wish somebody would have told you?
Well, I actually came to this kind of late. I had other careers, so I was an architect and I drew a lot. And I guess the thing that I would say, I still to this day have the problem that I've always had, and that is that I always try to do too many different things all at once. And I guess the thing I would say is that you get good at what you do all the time. And if you work with wood all the time, you get good at that. If you draw all the time, you get good at that, et cetera, et cetera. So whatever you want to do it and do it all the time.
Right.
I would also say that, you know, whatever medium you're working in, if you're really serious about it, it's about practice.
Mhm.
You know, it's not about gaining a fixed level of anything, because it's a process of just doing it and getting the feedback and growing with it. And I think that that's something that a lot of students could benefit from.
Yes.
Well, thank you all so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure to learn from you and gain more insight about the artists behind the amazing work in the Following Esherick show at GoggleWorks Center for the Arts. And for those viewers, if you haven't been to see the show yet, GoggleWorks Center for the Arts in Reading, Pennsylvania is open from 9 to 9, 7 days a week. And the work is on display. It's free and open to the public through June 27th. And we hope to see you visiting the show soon. And while you're there, check out everything happening at GoggleWorks. So to all of you, thank you so much for participating in this conversation this evening. It's been a real joy to talk woodworking with you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Mhm.